conclusion of the retopologizing stage, we often lose a little bit of the sharpness of the details in our mesh. The retopologizing and smoothing process tends to iron out some of the high-resolution sculptural details that we created in the previous stage, and I want to try to bring some of those back. If you look very carefully here, here's the retopologized sculpture that came right out of Maya. It's looking pretty good, pretty solid. However, if we compare it to the high-resolution one, you can see that I have a lot of information in here, and I want to see if I can bring some of that information back. Like, look at this lovely anatomy that I sculpted here. I have a really good indication of a jawline and a throat. And, there's some good stuff in there that just kind of got ironed out and lost a little bit in the lower resolution retopologized mesh that came out of Maya. So we're going to be using some modifiers to go in and extract some of this information. And specifically, there are two that we want to look for. There's a little bit of a dance that we have to play, but I think at the conclusion of this wonderful little ballet, we'll have a good starting point that allows us to work from the model that we worked so hard in the previous stage of our sculpture. So let's go ahead and do it real fast. Just as a reminder, I've already bring in a linked version of my high-resolution concept sculpt inside of Blender. There it is, okay? Without the eyeball, which is incredibly creepy, but it is what it is. Here's the low-res one, so I'm ready to rock and roll. So let's go ahead and start setting up the modifiers first. It's important to point out that we got to be in object mode in order for these modifiers to be applied. And as always, this little gear, this little wrench icon inside of our tool properties is going to allow us to add in a modifier. In order for us to extract the information from our concept sculpt, we need more geometry. If you look at the polygons on this version of the mesh, it's not a low-res, low poly. It's kind of a medium poly. But I have a lot of high poly information that was in the concept sculpt that I want to preserve. So I fundamentally just need some more geometry in here. Since we have good topology, that's all looped and it's all quad polygons, we get access to a wonderful modifier. It's called the multi-resolution modifier. You only really want to use the multi-resolution modifier with a quad polygon mesh, because what it's going to do, it's going to take one gigantic polygon like this, and it's going to subdivide it for us. It's going to split it into 4. We can keep adding these subdivisions and dynamically infuse our geometry with more polygons, which is great for high-resolution sculpting. There's some other big benefits of working with this modifier that you'll see as we go along the way. Let's go ahead and add the modifier. I'm going to go, let me get back into object mode here real fast. And let's go modifier. And you can find the multi-resolution modifier inside the generate column. And there it is. This is what it looks like. Modifiers are something that we've seen before inside of Blender, and this modifier stack is a really great tool for us to start layering on additional tools that are going to globally influence the mesh. Now, for the multi-resolution modifier, the first thing that we need to do is click Subdivide, which is going to take all the existing geometries and slice them into 4s. If we were to jump over into sculpt mode real fast, we'll be able to see all of that lovely subdivided geometry. Okay, now we're getting more information. If we were to go down a level, there's the original at sculpt level of 0, but since we did one level of subdivision, now we have more, and we're logarithmically adding more geometry into the scene. What started off with about 5,000 faces, including the claws, with a subdivision level of 1, we're now at 22,000 faces inside of our mesh. So we are logarithmically adding more geometry into the scene, which is good for sculpting, right? Because we want to have a lot of geometry so we can go in and sculpt fine details into the mix itself. Now, in order for us to use the next modifier, I think we actually need 2 different layers, if you will, of subdivision. So let's hit the subdivide button one more time. My computer's going to think now we're at 89,000 polygons, and that's enough polygons to really begin to extract the information from a high-resolution sculpt. The second modifier that we're going to apply is called the Shrink Wrap Modifier. You can find this under the Deform column. Let's go ahead and add it in. As one might imagine, the Shrink Wrap Modifier is going to take an existing separate object, and it's going to shrink. It's going to wrap my new retopologized mesh to the concept sculpture. So think of it kind of like shrink wrapping saran wrap around around a dish. The good polygon version is going to be shrunk wrapped around the bad topology version or the concept sculpt. Now we have to set the target The target's going to be the concept sculpt, and in my case, it's also called turtle body. So we get to select it from the pull-down menu. And now, once we do so, and we go back into object mode, now you'll start to see that things are starting to take shape, which is pretty cool. We're starting to get some of that anatomy back, which is pretty neat. We get some problems that we have to fix, and we'll fix that here in a second. But ultimately, we're taking the geometry that was created at the concept sculpting, and we're shrinking our good topology version of our mesh to the concept sculpt. Now, with all modifiers, this top row right here inside of the modifier stack allows us to go in and customize how we're viewing and how we're enabling this modifier inside the scene. This camera icon will allow us to render this modifier. This one right here will kind of activate and deactivate, and this is a great illustration as to what this modifier is doing. Let's turn off our wireframes, which will be a really good visualization. And if we turn it on and off, yeah, you can start to see that we're getting some of that information back. Now, I don't want all of it back because I still want to be able to go in and continue to hand sculpt some of this stuff. But at the very least, I'm starting to get some really good indications of where I need to be and how I need to structure my mesh to kind of get a little bit closer back to all the wonderful results that I accomplished at the conclusion of the previous sculpting stage. So I'm real happy with this. So the multi-resolution modifier and the Shrink Wrap Modifier work together in tandem to allow us to extract all of the concept sculpting information that we completed in the previous stage of our sculpting